This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hi, this is Allison Stallo, CFO of Fundrise, and you are listening to CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 913.
My immediate priority has been and will continue to be to learn how the business operates. And I mean like operates, not what people say or what is written down on paper somewhere, but how the business actually functions. And then with that knowledge, gained through a lot of conversations and a lot of just watching what's going on, how can I affect the kind of change from my seat that the business needs to be either more effective or more efficient or drive greater top line or profitable growth? It's as simple as that. We need to continue the great growth trajectory that the company was on before I got here. Frankly, I want to accelerate it. I want to pour the gas on and I want to find a match. And I want to light that match and have that growth just take off.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Jeff Noto, CFO of Zayo. When Jeff Noto is asked to reflect back on his 35 years with Verizon, he tells us that his earliest years with the company were spent scoring quick returns on investments Verizon had made inside its fledgling wireless business. According to Noto, being able to demonstrate speedy returns on investments became critical to securing future investments and for building the business case that wireless could someday be a viable alternative to wireline services. 35 years later, wireless has trumped wire-to-line services, and Jeff Noto has entered the CFO office at Zayo. That is, after checking off his 35th year at Verizon. What is it that kept Noto there for 35 years? And what's this opportunity that he finally swung open the door? You'll find the answer to these questions and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking with Jeff Noto, CFO of Zayo. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, Jeff, as always, we're going to ask you to look back for us and share some of those experiences you feel prepared you for this role. What would come to mind for you?
So I've spent a lot of my career at Verizon, a very different company than Zayo in terms of scale. But in my previous roles at Verizon, my most recent roles at Verizon, I was the CFO of 2 of the business units within the company. One was the Global Network and Technology Organization, and that has a very direct relationship to Zayo and what we do here. And the other company, the other entity was the Global Solutions entity, where we were trying to find more efficient ways to serve our internal clients, have scale economies, be more efficient, be more standardized in how we approach the internal cost structure, internal service provision. So those two things, have really led to me to Zayo. I can apply both those here at Zayo in a way that makes us both more efficient, but also, given the scale and complexity of Verizon, and then coming to albeit a smaller company, but still having many of the same complexity issues in terms of the services we deliver to connect our customers to the networks that they want to be part of. There's a ton of overlap. So I'm very excited to apply what I've learned over my many years at Verizon back here in Zayo to help them improve the business.
I think I keep on thinking I've done the math wrong. I'm looking at your LinkedIn bio, trying to add up the years you were at Verizon. It's quite a long tenure. And I'm wondering, where was it that you began exactly? Don't know. Was there an earlier chapter?
I went into Verizon right out, pretty much. I worked for Lehman Brothers for about 3 weeks, and then went into Verizon at a I've been there 35 years, very long time.
I'm sorry, you went to Lehman Brothers for 3 weeks, did you say?
3 weeks. 3 weeks. I thought I wanted to be an investment banker, but I quickly realized that was not the path for me.
I mean, you pulled the cord and jumped out of Lehman, and you were just happened to be offered a position at Verizon. I mean, was it twist of fate for you?
It was very much a twist of fate. I had a friend who worked for the company, and this was a long time ago. This is 1987. So my friend from high school rolls up in his car, and he's got a phone in his car, and I thought that was pretty cool. So when he said they were hiring, I said I'd be very happy to apply, and he took my resume in, and things kind of progressed from there. It was actually an interesting story because I was one of the first college classes that I took in my senior year was a class in running Excel. Actually, at the time it was Lotus 1-2-3. That's how long ago it was. And when I got into Bell Atlantic, which was the precursor to Verizon, nobody knew how to run spreadsheets. So suddenly, the one class and the one skill that I brought to the company was suddenly very, very valuable, in that I could run these spreadsheets and do these kind of basic analytics that today seem incredibly immature by comparison. Back then seemed cutting edge. So it was just a very fortuitous set of events.
Can I ask? I mean, it was Verizon then. I remember it was New York. Or help us out.
It was Bell Atlantic for me. It was Bell Atlantic in the Mid Atlantic states, and it was 9X up in the Northeast. So I was part of Bell Atlantic, based in New Jersey.
All right. So that first 10 years, your first 10 years there, what was happening? Consolidation? Was it thought of as a cable provider at that place in time? What was the identity of the organization you were working in?
It was a very interesting dynamic, because I was now hired into the what was called Bell Atlantic Mobile, which was the wireless, the precursor to Verizon Wireless today, but a very, very early stage, almost a startup kind of a business. And at the time, my perspective is there was a lot of doubt as to whether or not wireless would really be a real business. I mean, that the wireline, landline business was the behemoth that drove all the cash flow, drove all the revenue, drove all the customers. And there was this very expensive service called wireless that people weren't really sure was going to take off at the time. So a lot of our efforts were focused on, growing the customer base, growing our distribution, effectively deploying capital and managing our assets to make sure we could provide quick returns on investment, so that we could get continued investment, and then show the rest of the world that we could be a viable alternative to wireline services. And it just sounds funny saying that where we sit today, because it's so reversed in that wireless now is the main way of communications, at least, from the handset to the tower. But then from that point, it's all fiber optics, which is what Zayo does. So it's a nice, it's a funny intersection of how these things all came together and how the world turned over my very long career at Verizon. But it's every time I look back, I kind of chuckle about people thinking wireless may not have been a real product for very long.
So I just want to just quickly touch on again, you're not the first finance leader who turned their back on investment banking rather quickly. As you think back now, you were a young man at the time. Do you ever question yourself? And certainly not after having had a successful career. But at the same time, do you think of yourself as being a little brash in what you did? Or no, there was something that you just knew was off, not for me?
It's a great question. I think for me, it was more, the first couple weeks, probably even the first couple years at investment banking firms are known to be a little rigorous. Maybe we'll say rigorous. And, when I looked around at the work that we were doing, which was largely cold calling, and I looked around at the people around me, some of who were completely into it. It's what they wanted to do. They love sales. They love selling. They just had that knack. I didn't have that. I was more subdued maybe in my approach to that. And I could see that this was probably not going to be the right career path for me.
Interesting. So when you do arrive, and that's an awful long time to be with one company. I mean, what was it that, thinking back, what was it that kept you there? I'm sure there were chapters where maybe you were almost recruited away, but no. What kept you at Verizon? And I imagine it was opportunity, but what kept you there?
It's a great question. When I first joined Verizon, I was very young, just out of college, just learning the ropes. But after 5, 6, 7 years, I began to look around. But there was always another opportunity that came along. In my case, Verizon decided they were going to build an international division, and we were going to go around the world and try and build wireless companies with partners in the local jurisdictions, and try and be more of a global wireless player. And I was fortunate enough to work with some great people and get selected for that role. And I spent the next 10 years of my career, traveling around the world on Verizon's nickel, meeting a lot of people, seeing a lot of things I never would have otherwise seen, getting involved in topics both in the business, but also in the different cultures and countries I visited that I never would have had the experiences for. I grew up in a small town, worked on farms my whole life, growing up. So traveling around the world and being in these different countries and talking with different people, and it was just an amazing experience. And we were very successful at it. We took a lot of investments in foreign countries and turned them into very big businesses over time. And it was a great experience. But at some point, it became time to spend more time at home and stop all the traveling. And I ended up leaving that role for another role at Verizon because there was another opportunity. Verizon was and is a phenomenal company. I love people that I left behind there. I mean, truly people that I love and miss dearly. And it was, you could find little pockets of startup enterprises in that big company if you looked hard enough and if you had proven your ability to go in and solve problems. And I think that's what I love doing. I love puzzles. I love figuring things out. I love finding new ways to do things. And if you can find opportunities in a big company where you can focus your efforts on trying to solve a problem or enter a new market or create something new, that gets me energized. And Verizon always had those opportunities. It's a big company, but I was always able to find small pockets of opportunity to do things that were a little more boutique.
Yeah, so that's an interesting way to put it, because my question was going to be, as you speak to your peers at other large organizations, perhaps at a conference, at just networking opportunities that were out there, what was it that you thought, hey, that's different from what I'm seeing or experiencing at Verizon? That's not how we review our people, or maybe we do it a little differently. Is there anything that as far as the finance career track at Verizon is concerned, that you think was somewhat unique or different from what you saw others experiencing?
Sure. Look, I only saw other companies through the lens of the people I was speaking with. So you never really know how crystal clear that is. But my perspective was, Verizon, the finance leaders at Verizon, and I've worked with so many great CFOs at Verizon that trained me, educated me, and brought me along. And the focus all the time in every job, if you were in finance, was your job is to provide insights, actionable insights to your clients so that they can then improve the business, with the goal of being included more often upfront and more proactively as you gain that experience and gain that trust. And so from a very early point in my career in finance, we were taught that our role was not, to be the gatekeeper or the reporter or the compliance stick, although those are parts of the role. The real role was to help grow the business by being that trusted business partner that would help the business operate more efficiently, see things through a different lens, maybe see different data points that they didn't have access to, and bring them to the table in a way that gave them a perspective that helped them change how they operate, or change how they went after a customer segment, or change how they dealt with churn. It was always about finding that actionable insight that would help the business, rather than being the reporting person or the planning person or the person that comes and cuts your budget once a year. It was trying to be more of a proactive member of the team. And that to me always felt like we executed better in those areas, and therefore finance was seen more of a business partner as opposed to In some cases, I've heard them referred to as necessary evils.
Want to just ask you, and I frequently ask this question. I'm wondering if there was a time at Verizon where you were tapped on the shoulder by maybe the CFO, maybe a unit CFO to give a presentation. It was perhaps the first time you had to go before an influential group of executives. It might have been towards the end of your career. Maybe it was before the board. I don't know. But can you recall for us where, and we're looking, of course, for sort of a nervous situation where you were like, oh, really? Oh. And you had the opportunity to step up and present. Anything come to mind for you?
Sure. As I said, I grew up in a small town, went to a small school, attended Rutgers University, great school. But public speaking was not one of the things in any of those venues that I ever looked forward to. So when I had my first large team, and I remember very, very, very vividly when my business unit president came and asked me to present our financials to a few thousand of our closest friends in the organization. It was a pretty daunting moment for me. I'm not a shy person necessarily, but public speaking in front of 3,000 people I didn't know was a little daunting. What made it doable was I know my business. I know the financials of the business unit I'm working on. I know how those financials impact the people I was talking to. So while I was very nervous, and I'm sure my heart was pumping so loud they could probably hear it on the microphone, I focused on trying to talk to the team about how what they did manifested itself into the financials. And I tried to be very fact-based and very focused on delivering that message. And over time, I could feel my heart rate kind of drop back down again, and then suddenly it became actually kind of fun, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed I preach ruthless transparency a lot in with my teams ever since I became a CFO at Verizon, and even now at Zayo. Because I think a big part of a finance team's role is to help people understand how what they do manifests itself in the financial results of the company. And I would argue that is the scorecard. There's many operational scorecards, but the real scorecard that shareholders or owners or investors look at is how are you doing on your financials? And if people don't understand how what they do day to day impacts those financials, you can quickly become delinked. And I think if you can do it the right way and link those things, you're much more effective, much more productive as an organization.
So we'll have a few more career-related questions, I'm sure, for you, Jeff. But right now, let's find out about Zayo. It seems like if there was a company you were going to step into as a CFO, this would likely be it. But I'll let you share with us the nature of this business. Zayo, tell us about it. What does it do? What are its offerings?
It's a great company. I'll tell you. So in my last role at Verizon, I actually interacted a fair amount with Zayo because they were, we buy and sell services from each other. I got to know the management team. I got to know the business. And, when I think about, look, as I said before, I love Verizon. I bleed red, Verizon red, and there's people that I left behind that I miss terribly, and I still am in touch with. So it was very hard for me to leave Verizon after 35 years. It was in fact, actually doing it was even harder than thinking about it when I accepted the role. But, the opportunity at Zayo is to me just massive. Number one, they are behind the digital revolution that's been occurring for decades now in the U.S. Bandwidth consumption from retailers to data centers to just you and I who use our phones or use our computers to search the internet and shop or whatever else, research, that all flows through fiber optic cables. That all flows through the things that Zayo does. So I feel like there's a very, very heavy tailwind that's going to keep that growth going. I don't see bandwidth dropping anytime soon. Certainly the customers coming to us at Zayo are looking for more and more capacity. And I think Zayo is uniquely positioned. It's an independent provider of fiber optics. We are only fiber optics. We have some of the best names in the business. We have a very extensive network, almost 140,000 route miles. And when I met the leadership team, so I knew the business itself and I knew the people I interacted with. But when I met more the leadership team, I love the culture. I love the fire and the passion that everyone kind of brings to the table to solve things. And because it's a smaller business than Verizon, we can be more nimble. we can get 3 or 4 executives in a room and make a decision after a half an hour conversation. We may not get it right the first time, but if we don't get it right the first time, we'll find a way to make it right with a change or a tweak to the strategy or the decision. So I'm having a blast. It's a great company. I don't know that there was another company that I've seen that I would have left Verizon for, but it's a great opportunity. I'm so happy I'm here.
I know it's only a short while ago, I think, that you joined the company, but I'm wondering, just in terms of you arrive and are all the numbers visible for you? You're accustomed to Verizon, that they measure everything. They have a KPI for very specific areas. You arrive here, I have to believe, suddenly the dashboard looks a little different to you, and you might wonder why we couldn't do it a little differently, or where is this number, and why don't we see this number yesterday? Can you share with us a little bit about your arrival there and whether you thought your lines of sight were everything they needed to be?
It actually was one of the surprising things. I didn't realize how ingrained I was in the terminology that Verizon uses to articulate a thing, a metric, a process. And Zayo uses different terminology, so that just the translation is still, frankly, I think my team would tell you I asked the same question a couple of times in a row now. But the translation now of what the terminology has been a big change for me, and making sure I can adapt my mind to the way they speak and the way they look at things. But the process is the same, right? You're digging into the financials, you're making sure you comb through the results as best you can, which was hard for me in the interview process because it's a private company. Even after I said yes and I signed the NDAs and I got access to the financials, until you get into business and can really talk to people and dig in, it's a little more difficult. So I spent a lot of time in those first weeks digging through the financials, talking to everybody, my direct reports, my peers. I did skip levels. I talked to the owners. I talked to our lenders, just trying to get a very broad perspective on what people thought of the business, what people felt was the places I needed to focus, and what they would do if they were me. That was kind of my ending question to everybody.
So could you tell us a little bit about the capital structure, like a short history of it maybe, so we understand better what chapter you're part of today?
Zayo's had a very interesting history. It was founded back in 2007, as I recall. And it formed through a number of acquisitions by a very talented leadership team who pulled together 45, 46 entities, different companies, over the course of many years to create this company we now call Zayo. I don't think you could do that again in the world. I don't think those another 46 companies exist. So a massive lift to buy all those companies, integrate them, merge them, make them operate seamlessly. And they went public back in 2014. And then they went private again. A company called EQT and Digital Bridge jointly took the company private in 2020. So since then, they've been a private entity, working to grow the business and invest in the right places. I think the hope is that we can maybe go back to public at some point in the future. But the goal right now is to make sure we're doing the right things operationally and financially to show that we have a strong balance sheet, a strong growth profile, a strong profitable growth profile, and make sure we can really do those things that make our customers happy and our constituents happy. So it's a unique, and that's part of what went into my decision to join the company. It's a very unique company that I don't think you could replicate in today's environment, and it's at a unique point in its maturity that offers some very interesting opportunities for the leadership team and for our customers.
So what then would be your the numbers you want to see before your first cup of coffee in the morning? What are you looking at regularly? What are those measurements?
Yeah, so I like to call myself a operational finance person. I focus first and foremost on the operational metrics of the business. What the sales results are, what the network quality metrics are, what the build metrics are that I can see on a daily or weekly basis. The thing that I find interesting, and it applied to Verizon and it applies at Zayo as well, is, there's no real new data out there. The problem is there's almost too much data out there. I mean, every system nowadays throws off a ton of metrics. Every organization measures a ton of metrics. The trick shot, I think, for a finance team or for a CFO is what are the ones that matter, to your point. And to me, without going into specifics, because we are a private company, I had to be a little careful, is is understanding which of those metrics, which of those early indicators, or which of those directional indicators really can help you lead to an action. I often talk about, when I talk to executives that I support, what do you need from my team? What are you not getting that you would help you be better or more efficient? And I get two different answers. One answer is I'll get really insightful, here are the things I need. And if only I had this, I could do this. And then I could do this. And that's where I get excited. But there's also this concept of security blanket metrics, a metric that was important 5, 10, 15 years ago that an executive has grown up with, and they like to see it every day or every week, but it's not super meaningful anymore. But it makes them feel better to know, oh, the metric's 2. Okay, it was 2 yesterday, it was 2 last month, it was 2 a year ago, it was 2 10 years ago. I'm not sure how helpful that is. So I'm not really interested in proliferating that kind of behavior. I want to look at the data that can actually be correlated with other data, maybe look at this team's operational data and this team's operational data and then this financial data, pull it together in a way that provides an insight that makes us change how we behave, that makes us more efficient, makes us more easy to deal with from a customer perspective. That's where I think finance can really add a lot of value. So it's more about finding those nuggets of data. By the way, go Nuggets, and making sure we can really operationalize that in a way that helps the business get better. That's the goal.
As you moved into this smaller company, really, curious as to your mindset when it comes to talent and people. It would seem to me that there aren't as many layers of management either. So you're much more accessible, perhaps, than you were in a very large enterprise. What we're trying to reveal is how finance is becoming a bigger part of sort of the human capital equation of business, and whether there are certain numbers you're paying attention to, whether it's employee churn, net new hires, whether it's something that you've begun to think a little differently about. One would imagine, since you came from a large enterprise to a mid-sized one or smaller one, you're a little more aware of the people challenges.
It's a great question. Look, people are the heart of any business. I say this phrase all the time, and I think I drive people crazy with it. I refer to, I say team sport almost continually. And what I mean by that is every business as large, as complex as ours or Verizon, needs a strong team. Team requires the best players, and even the best players need to know how to play their positions. If all those things work out, the right things happen. You measure yourself by the points you put on the board, and you got to root out the people that aren't performing and either coach them up and bring them up to a level where they can perform, or you need to move them on because the other players on the team see the folks that aren't contributing and then begin to wonder why leadership isn't acting. So I think leadership action is super important. The interesting thing that I've seen over the last couple of years with post-COVID is every company is a little more open to having a more wider geographical view of where they're willing to capture talent, and it cuts both ways. My employees, if they don't feel as though they're being valued, have a lot of opportunity almost globally, but at the same time, we as an employer have an opportunity to hire people almost globally. So it's made the job market, I think, both more challenging and more accessible to us. So to me, it's about making sure I got the right people on the team, making sure they understand that ruthless transparency, what I want, how I want it, how the business needs it. And we operate in a way that helps people understand how what they do affects the business. So I think the finance organization has a really critical role to play, both in terms of getting the right talent that have that mindset to be proactive, to be insightful, to try and are more action oriented than reporting oriented. And then the business, as you prove yourself that way, begins to involve you in more things. And that's, I think, more fun for finance people. I think there's probably some finance people who want to do debits and credits and just run reports. But the people I've known and love that kind of move onto the business and add value are the ones that want to get into the why things happen. How can I change how it happens? How can I help my client get better? That's where to me, that's the fun part of finance, not the back office thing that no one sees. It's being actively involved in the business.
We always like to understand better whether you have a FP&A philosophy or where you might deploy your FP&A brain power, the team members, where they go, how you maybe embed them. I don't know, but And maybe Zayo had a different working philosophy than what you're accustomed to at Verizon. And you thought, well, maybe we can do this a little differently, and maybe I can learn from what you do. I don't know. But what would you tell us about your FP&A team and how you like to deploy those resources?
I would tell you, I grew up through most of my career in FP&A roles. I got my CPA only about 7 years ago, largely because I felt it would round me out, and I wanted to make sure I understood, the bigger picture, and frankly, from a personal perspective, give me more opportunity, which it led to this role. I don't think I'd have this opportunity with Zayo if I didn't go and get my CPA. But the FP&A side is, I think, sometimes undervalued in businesses because people think about them, again, as reporting people or planning, budgeting people, or you're here to cut my budget, as opposed to a proactive and integrated member of the operating team that can help them get to a point where they can see things differently, get those insights, and improve the business, and offer insights through that financial lens that maybe the operating team doesn't have. So I'm a huge proponent of making my FP&A team feel more like a member of my client teams than my team. As an example, I tell them all the time, if my staff meeting conflicts with the meeting you have to have with the business unit, you miss my staff meeting and you go to talk to the business unit. That's where we add value. So I think the FP&A roles are critical, and even more critical. And I also think, the lines are blurring between what FP&A does and even almost not quite data science, but certainly data analytics. I think finance people have a role to play to step in and be more science-based analytical talent as much as CPA or CGMA or CFA type financial people. I think we've got to bridge that gap and be the glue that kind of holds the company together or pulls the company together in different ways than we have in the past.
Okay, well, we're up to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you to look back over your career and just pull out one for us. It might have happened last week, but it might have been 20 years ago. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
I guess what comes to mind for me was when I was back in that international division and we were working to stand up these companies around the world. I always came at it through a lens of, I'm here to learn how to create a company like we have in the United States, in Europe, or in Asia, or in Latin America. And I remember very discreetly, we were in a meeting in Italy. Actually, at the time, we were forming an Italian company called Omnitel with a few of our partners. And it kind of struck me that while I was sitting there waiting to hear all these great ideas from the Italian team and from our partners in Europe, they were looking at all of us saying, hey, look, we brought you in here to help us build this company because you have a great company in the United States. We need you to step up. They didn't say the words, but it hit me in that meeting that I can picture the conference room. I can pick, it was in Milan in a building, and I can picture this meeting. And it kind of struck me that, we needed to take more of a leadership role, at least in offering out perspectives and options. And that kind of stuck with me only because, as I said earlier, I think finance people tend to think of themselves as I'm kind of at the tail end of the train, or I'm dealing with the results of what happened. I'm telling you what has happened so you can think about it and do stuff. And I think in that moment I realized finance needs to be working their way towards the front of that train and helping people understand, based on what we've done historically, here's what I think we should do going forward to change that trajectory if it's a bad thing, or leverage that trajectory if it's a good thing. And in that meeting, in that moment, it really struck me that, and probably to my ill, I was probably before that point in my career, maybe a little too reactive. But that's the moment where I thought about, holy moly, I gotta rethink this. I gotta change my entire perspective. I need to be more proactive. I need to lean in. I need to step up and make suggestions. And I need to be more of a leader as opposed to we're finance, we're here to help on the back end. But it sticks. I talk about it all the time because it sticks with me. And I think when I see people in finance who are early in their career and they're kind of leaning back in their chair and they're not really, I can see there's something they want to say, but they're not really sure they want to say it. You call on those people. Hey, Lisa, looks like you have something to say. Oh, no, come on, say it. So I think it helps me kind of bring people out, bring more inclusive voices into the audience or into the discussion. But it was a seminal moment for me because I'll never forget it. I can still picture the meeting room, the people who were there, what we were doing. It's burned into my brain.
From episode 853, this is 1 Minute with Chip Zett, CFO of Deluxe.
If all things are equal, just based off how the revenue's moving, we know what it's going to do to our profitability, our mix. And so keeping our eye on the ball on revenue and the pipeline behind it is oh so important. We also have to focus very hard on our expense growth factor. So think of that as your expense growth ratio to your revenue growth, right? And you can't have any one area where, if revenue is going to grow 3%, you can't have your expenses grow 6%, And so it's discipline inside the portfolio. And there's things that are declining, the expenses need to decline in line with it. And things that are growing, the expense growth has to be controlled and tethered and stay in sync. And so we're always focused on that expense growth factor. It's kind of an E to R ratio, but it's a different thought.
We're going to move to our mentoring round, where I'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We'd like you to think back in time, perhaps the first time you were promoted into a business unit CFO role at Verizon, or a division role, however they characterize it. And think about that first 30 days. What is the piece of advice you would have given yourself, that first 30 or 60 days? There was something you wish you had knew, something about leadership, maybe something about who knows. Anything come to mind?
Yes. For me, I was always successful. When I was successful, there were times I wasn't, but when I was successful, it's because I did the job or the specific work really well, or at least better than the people around me, and you got noticed and you were promoted. But when you become a business unit CFO or a division CFO or a corporate CFO, you can't possibly do all the work. You need to rely on that team. But you've got to change. You've got to be willing to change what made you successful. And I struggled with it. I was probably doing too much and not leading enough early on in that process. But I got some good coaching and I was able to turn the corner. So I think a big part of it is you need to know when to be the player and when to be the coach. And you need to make sure you hire people smarter than you, that do it better than you. And the ones that aren't quite, you got to coach up, as I said before. But you've really got to change your methodology to be not thinking you have to do the work yourself and make it happen, but get the people around you to do it at the level of quality or consistency that you think it needs to be done based upon your internal clock.
You shared something very interesting earlier. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to hear an accountant, someone who really had accounting roots, who decides they really would like to get into the FP&A side of the business. And often they might do an MBA, take an MBA at night. How do I get over there? I need a stripe on my sleeve. You went back and got an accounting degree, I think you mentioned, which is really interesting because you had the FP&A experience, but you really wanted to demonstrate that you had all the technical knowledge, I suppose. Sometimes we only think it goes the other way. But no, the accounting technical knowledge and what have you is so important.
It's a great point. Look, as you said, I was an FP&A professional, and I was a business unit CFO at Verizon. But I felt in my heart that if you're going to hold the title of a CFO, even in a business unit, you need to understand more than just one aspect of that. What that means, you need to get more well-rounded. I believe in continuous learning. I think you need to invest in yourself. I think different people at different points in their life. When young families or no families or other time requirements, you tend to focus on other things and you forget about the investment you made in your college years that led you to these starting points. But you don't really always go back and reinvest in yourself. And it kind of hit me one day that it was time to reinvest in myself and take on something that was a little scary. I was never super good at accounting in my undergrad degree. But I felt like I needed to do it if I was going to hold the title of CFO. And did very well at it. It got me into an adjunct teaching position as well. and it led to a couple of opportunities, one of which I took at Zayo. So I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's another point of advice is always invest in yourself.
Well, we'd like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side, Jeff. We're wondering if you're known for sort of a personal habit or part of a routine that you do every day. People pointed out that's just what Jeff does. He's always done it that way. It might be something a family member would point out first to us.
Yeah, I'm a fairly structured person. My typical model is I'm up pretty early. I'm in the office, usually ahead of everyone else, because that's my time to figure out what my day's gonna be like, get myself prepared, but also think about what my priorities are for the day. I mean, I've been known to come in and drive my assistant batty because I'll take a very well organized and thoughtfully structured day, and I will upend it because I think there's another priority I got to focus on in that moment. So that first hour of maybe day redesign is probably what I'm best known for and probably a little hated for.
Well, did Verizon move you around quite a bit?
Apart from my job internationally, no. I grew up in New Jersey. I was based in Verizon's headquarters in New Jersey. Spent a few years working in Philadelphia, a few years working in New York City, but they were all commutable. And then when I traveled internationally for those 10 years, I was 80% probably out of the country at any point in time. But my wife actually, her family moved around a lot. So I knew going into the marriage that moving around a lot was probably not a good idea. So my boss at home was very clear on the rules, and I did my best to find the right opportunities to stick to those rules.
Was there along the way, did you pick up a book, or is there some book you'd like to recommend to our listeners? Doesn't have to be a business book. It might be something you escape with, something that's influenced you in some way.
The book there's a book called Left of Bang. I don't know who the authors are, but that was a pretty impactful book I read a couple years back. It's a book, actually, the Marine Corps have a training regimen they take some of their soldiers through. And the intention is to recognize the signs of something happening before it happens. In the military, think of an ambush. Left of bang is the things that happened before the ambush that you could have seen that could have prevented the ambush or avoided a conflict. And it hit me, and the book is intended for business people, not just military people, but the same thing applies in business, right? How can you see those things before everyone else does that can help you instinctually or because of experientially or even just gut instinct that makes you think about something and say, hey, this doesn't feel right or this doesn't look right. I could give you some examples. I don't want to call any companies in general, but I remember a situation where a boss of mine and I were working with a company to try and do a joint venture, and something just didn't smell right. We couldn't figure out how they could make the math work. They wouldn't share the business case and the math with us. They couldn't really defend how they were going to do what they were going to do. And we felt uneasy, and we said, you know what, it's a great opportunity, but we're going to pass. We just don't understand this. A couple of weeks later, that company, it's a very well-known company, was under heavy investigation and is no longer in existence. And I thank my lucky stars that my boss and I had the fortitude to say, it doesn't smell right. We're not doing this. Because 2 weeks later, it would have been pretty embarrassing. And but I think that ability to foresee or to have a gut instinct or to avoid something because you see something that doesn't quite feel right was reinforced by that book, and I thought it was a great book.
Yeah, it's apparently it's Patrick Van Horn. I had time to look it up as you were discussing it, and Jason Riley are the authors. Left of Bang: How the Marine Corps Combat Hunger Program Can Save Your Life. So it's in paperback.
Or save your career.
Save your career. Excellent. We always like getting a new selection, so thank you for that. We are up to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And we're wondering what your priorities are. I'm sure you've given these a lot of thought, having only stepped into the office a few months back. But what are your priorities over the next 12 months as CFO of Zayo?
Well, my immediate priority has been and will continue to be to learn how the business operates. And I mean like operates, not what people say or what is written down on paper somewhere, but how the business actually functions. And then with that knowledge, gained through a lot of conversations and a lot of just watching what's going on, how can I affect the kind of change from my seat that the business needs to be either more effective or more efficient or drive greater top line or profitable growth? And I've got some insights into that already. Talking to our lenders and our owners, I have their perspectives on things. And really, it's as simple as that. We need to continue the great growth trajectory that the company was on before I got here. Frankly, I want to accelerate it. I want to pour the gas on, and I want to find a match. And I want to light that match and have that growth just take off. But I also want to make sure we're doing that at the cost that's required to provide that growth, and not at any cost. High growth companies fall into this trap all the time, where it's almost growth at any cost because we'll figure it out later. We'll be more efficient later. We'll figure it out later. That doesn't work out too well in my experience. So I want to make sure we start from the very beginning. We can be very efficient on how we do that. We're very focused on profitable growth and searching out every single nugget of gold we can find that makes us, more and more profitable, but does not jeopardize our customer experience or our customer satisfaction.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps
Jeff Noto,
already
thank you
heard
for joining us on
even
CFO
seen,
Thought Leader.
Thank you very
we're
much.
now
It's been my pleasure.
featuring
I appreciate the
career
time.
lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.